Our next reader is A.D. Nauman. She's a Chicagoland educator and author. Her second novel, Down the Steep, was recently chosen as a 2024 Great Group Reads book by the Women's National Book Association. The novel has also won the 2024 FAW Literary Prize, was a semifinalist for the Midland Authors Award, and received an honorable mention for the Steinbeck Award. Newman's short fiction has appeared in many literary journals. Her stories have been recognized in Best American Short Stories, Pushcart Prize Anthology, been produced for Stories on Stage, broadcast on NPR, and granted an Illinois Arts Council Literary Award. Her first novel, Scorch, was re-released in an ebook story bundle in 2019. Currently living in Oak Park, Nauman grew up mostly in Tidewater, Virginia. When I asked her about an influential author, she said Alice Munro. So please welcome her to the stage.
Thank you all. Here's my prop. It's a Diet Coke. By the way, I read Sandra's book. It's wonderful. So you should all run over there and grab it after the reading. Okay, so before I start reading, just a couple of things that you should know. This is I call it a faux memoir. It reads like a memoir, but it's actually fiction. But just to make things more complicated, it is actually based in some of my real experience when I was a child. It's told from the point of view of an older woman looking back on a pivotal year in her childhood, and that year was 1963-64, when she, my fictitious character, was 13. Okay. So when I was a young child, my family moved to a small town in southeast Virginia where my father was a minister, to carry on the theme of religion. And we lived there for 4 years. And my mother would often comment to me over the years when I was older. She would say there were Klan members in that church. And so that's what gave me the idea for this. This is a book about the teenage daughter of a Klansman who learns to overcome her racism. So it's aspirational. All right, I'm reading from the first chapter. When I was 13 years old in 1963, I realized some people in this world are extras, born to be peripheral, and I was one of them. My parents had 4 children, boy, girl, girl, boy. As girl number 2, I served as a backup if anything happened to girl number 1. Worse, it was clear my parents had wanted another boy. They had planned to name the new baby William without bothering to choose a girl's name, and when I turned out to be me, they lazily named me Willa. After my little brother Billy was born, they quit having kids. We lived in southeast Virginia, in the low-lying coastal region known as the Tidewater. Our town was small but bigger than its neighbors, its industry hardy thanks to lumber, hogs, and peanuts. In summer, the air hung thick as swamp, rattling with insects. The smell of sawdust and tree lilies mingled with the rotting cabbage stench of the paper mill. I used to fly my bike up Main Street through our downtown, 5 blocks of white painted brick facades. Across the Blackwater River was the lumber yard where towers of skinny pine logs rose up beside stacks of slender sheets of wood. "That's what will become of you," I'd say out loud to the logs, then zoom past them toward the peanut silo, embossed with its monocled cartoon peanut kicking up a merry leg. Beyond the silo, hunched along the railroad tracks, were shacks cobbled together with scraps of wood, corrugated plexiglass, and pieces of billboard sign. This was where the most impoverished black people lived. Of course, in that place and time, all the African Americans were extras, part of the blurred background erected for those standing center stage. Blacks who behaved well were allowed to serve whites. Tidewater was where the first shackled Africans were brought in 1619 to be sold as slaves, though that fact did not tend to come up in polite conversation, and our conversation was always polite. We were a gracious folk, eager to distinguish ourselves from those coarse inhabitants of the Deep South. Tidewater was not a place where churches blew up or police battered marchers with water hoses on national television. Southeast Virginians were descendants of the first ever Brits to land in the New World, settlers who'd lived in Jamestown, who'd met Pocahontas. In my hometown, Kingsfield, people felt their worth. They also understood the value of avoiding trouble, and so they offered a strange sort of benevolence to their coloreds. Colors was what we called black people back then in polite society. Other times, I am ashamed to say, we called them the N-word, a word I refuse to use now. On my bike, I would soar up High Street, past the sprawling white clapboard houses with wide lawns of purple phlox and azaleas, through puddles of shade cast by grand weeping willows. In June, the crepe myrtles would bloom in their astonishing red and purple pinks. The trunks of crepe myrtles split at the base into a chaos of pale gray stems, and when I lived in Kingsfield, gardeners debated the proper treatment of them. Some insisted on pruning the trees down to 3 or 4 even trunks, while others believed the bloom was fuller when the trees grew free from the human impulse toward uniformity. It seems likely this debate continues, but I don't know. When I was 14, I destroyed our family and my parents sent me away, and I have never been back. I was, after all, only an extra. The important people in my family were as follows. First, my father, head of household, knower of all things, celestial object around which we were all naturally to revolve. Second was eldest son Ricky, expected to someday morph into my father. Third was my little brother Billy, a backup for Ricky should anything untoward happen to him. Tied for 4th place was my mother, with her many uses, and my eye-catching older sister, Barb. Then me. In the era of my childhood, women and girls were viewed as not quite people, existing in a state of foggy ineptitude, requiring guidance and long explanations of how things were and why. A woman's purpose in life was to make her husband feel important and comfortable, attended to, and in charge. A good woman was someone who accomplished this pleasantly without noisily voicing her own needs. My mother was a good woman. My father often told her this. In response, she would smile and try to look proud but not prideful. She was, in fact, an ideal female for the times, dutiful, acquiescent, reliable, attentive, homebound, entirely dependent on her husband. Although she was a Kingsfield outsider, having grown up in southern Ohio, people had an admiration for her. She was considered smart for a woman. She'd finished 2 years of college before quitting to get married, and while my father was off fighting in the Pacific, she'd worked as a secretary in a doctor's office. She knew how to pronounce and spell medical terms. Impressive, everyone agreed. Women's lib was slow in coming to Tidewater, but even at the age of 13, I could see that my mother's existence was small, focused on bits of food stuck to the insides of pots, threads hanging from the hems of skirts. I wanted to be like my father, a significant person in the world, someone who stood center stage. I wanted to be like my father, striding out of the house every morning with flapping lapels, briefcase in hand, leaping into our Oldsmobile and speeding backward out of the driveway. I wanted to be my father, coming home in the late afternoon with important news, telling my mother about his day, while she stood over a frying pan humming and clucking and sympathizing. I wanted to sit in a cushiony chair after dinner and read the newspaper, not scamper around with dirty plates and a towel over my shoulder. Men had interesting things to talk about: politics, foreign countries, wars. Women talked about how to hard-boil eggs so the shell wouldn't stick to the skin and leave pockmarks, rendering your deviled egg tray ugly and shameful. Women shared urgent tips on how to get all the silks off of the cobs after shucking the sweet corn so your husband wouldn't get strings caught in his teeth. Women's lives contracted as they aged. Men's expanded. Men went to meetings and made decisions that changed things. Recently, our town council had decided to build a new municipal pool, Olympic-sized, with 3 levels of diving boards. They'd voted to give the old crumbling public pool to the coloreds, which everyone agreed was so generous. One night at dinner, I attempted to step into the affairs of men. At the time, I didn't know it, but this was to be the opening act of the drama that ended in my family's ruin. That's it.